Hey folks, today we're going to be talking about Tinto Talks 24. This is for the super secret, nobody knows about game that is Project Caesar, aka EU5. We all know its real name, he just can't say it yet. And this week, Johan's going to talk to us about the naval aspects of the game, from Maritime Presence, Naval Combat, as well as transporting your units on ships. As always, we're just going to get straight into it, and we are starting with Maritime Presence. So first of all, we need to go back to the importance of Maritime Presence and the naval capacity in Project Caesar. I think this was originally covered in the 6th dev diary. That gave us our initial look, I think, at navies and how control worked in the game, if I remember correctly. Before you get an advanced road network through your country, your proximity propagation is much faster through places where you have maritime presence. This is where you kind of like zone control of the sea and ocean tiles. As you can see in a map in a second, if you haven't seen it before, the oceans and seas and lakes are all split into these larger tiles, and you can have maritime presence in those. I think you have to have a fleet stationed in them, kind of like patrolling them. And then especially early in the game, as he mentions here, if you don't have a complicated road network, this is actually the easiest way to spread your control or proximity to actually have control over your nation and get the most out of it that you can. And this is really what Maritime Presence is helping you do at the beginning of the game. Any sea zone that I was just talking about where you have no maritime presence or a location without a road network costs around 40 proximity to traverse through, which basically means you cannot propagate any control more than 3 locations away. Of course, there are things that can impact your proximity cost per location, like topography, vegetation, development, and societal values. So if that all doesn't really make sense, there is a map coming up now which shows, of course, Sweden, where else, and this will show you on the map what he's talking about here. So you can see on the colors here, this looks amazing, I will say. I love the kind of scale of color showing your control or your proximity. They're kind of, I'm not going to say they're interchangeable. Let's quickly go over what they are. So proximity is basically the value of how much that bit of land thinks it is connected to your capital. It's like a distance from your capital value, and that can change as you build up your infrastructure, and during this time frame kind of unifies your realm into thinking of itself as a realm, as historically, really through this time frame that happened. And as you can see on the map here, the white area is the capital area. And then you can see within those initial kind of area, it is green, and then it goes yellow, and then it goes orange, red, and then black. You have no control over this area. There are obviously places that he doesn't own on this map at the moment. But you can see here what he was just saying. If you don't use the sea, once you get like 3 locations deep, you can see the colors changing. So the capital there, around where it is, a lot of control, a lot of proximity to where the capital is. So they really feel themselves being part of Sweden. But once you get out into the mountain area especially, that is where you're seeing less control, because it's harder for your capital to really have full control over that area. It is Sweden, but it is less controlled by you. And then obviously as you progress with roads, and then especially through this dev diary, your naval control, that is how you can spread it. So as you can see again on the picture, the coastal areas are relatively well controlled. They have this high proximity effect because you have ships running up and down the coast. So those areas feel more connected to the capital. Once you get out of those, as we've already discussed, once you get inland, that's where you're seeing the problem. You can see this especially shown around the lake area. I will apologize, I don't know what that lake area is called in Scandinavia, but as you can see there, the kind of coastline on the left-hand side of that lake is slightly more orange than the area just over it, where it is red again. So you can see this effect especially shown there. And he did mention in an earlier dev diary that especially rivers, you will see this effect especially, because obviously historically ships could go up and down rivers, trading, moving people, all that kind of stuff. And that helped those people and those towns on that river feel again more unified into the actual country itself. So with that long rambling explanation, the map and what Johan was just saying, hopefully that kind of answers what that is if you were unsure. So proximity is just really how much that location feels it's under the control of your capital. And then control, now it is a separate number, but it is mainly the proximity effect plus any other modifiers from what I've understood during all these dev diaries. Do correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe that what it is, the proximity is like the base effect, and then you can get amendments to that through technology, roads, and all those kind of things he's talked about previously. So hopefully that answers that, and we're all on the same page. As such, let's get on with the rest of this dev diary. So for a coastal sea zone, if you have 100% maritime presence, the base cost is 5 per location. If you have less than 100% maritime presence, it will scale accordingly. So at 33% maritime presence, have no other modifiers, it would be, and then there's some maths there. I'm not going to read that out for you. And again, that's what we were just talking about. You can see how the presence is more evenly spread along the coast, And then once you get inland, that's where you'll really start to see those penalties take effect. In our first tooltip here, we can once again see Kalmar, and this is showing the proximity to capital for Kalmar itself, and it is showing all the different modifiers. And as you can see from this, the numbers are quite different, especially for the top one. And why is that? Well, that is tracing the proximity out of Kalmar to the sea zone of Kalmar Sund, which is a bit costly, as going from land to sea through a port has a high base cost. So it is expensive for that initial jump, and then it looks like that kind of helps you once you've got that bit out of the way. This is severely reduced by the infrastructure and development you have built up on that location, as well as the natural harbour attributes that the location has. And what are natural harbours? Is going to tell us right now. So natural harbours, this is something new to the game that has not been in a previous Paradox game. With so many locations, so much granularity, and mechanics emphasizing a deeper simulation, they had to start treating places differently. So this is a reason why certain places on the map are better suited as ports than others. And this is also locations that historically generally had this advantage because they had these natural harbors where, yep, you had to build docks and everything, but they were naturally good places for ships to dock. They had the right depths. You weren't going to run aground easily. All those kind of things that helped them naturally over time become bigger ports because the actual seabed itself was very good for these kind of things. And as you can see on the map here, this is a map of Europe, obviously, and you can see along the coastline from black to bright green, the level of these natural harbors. And I think you'll agree with most of these. I'm sure there's one or two where you're going to be calling out, but you can see like Venice, a very good natural harbor. There's a lot at the top of Iberia here in the UK, in the south of Ireland. All these places that historically did have fantastic areas to build docks because historically they did have these. Of course, you can improve the harbour suitability of a location by building certain infrastructure. So even if the location does not have a good natural benefit, you could still build it up. It will just be more costly to do so. So you can kind of get it to the same level. It's just going to be a lot more work than if you have that natural harbour base to start with. And that is what the next tooltip is going to show us. So this is the harbour suitability for Bristol. This will, as shown, significantly impact the trade and proximity calculations, and also impacts how quickly armies can be loaded and unloaded from a specific location. And you can see here, as I was saying, the harbour suitability here is 35%. This is because it has that base suitability of 25%. It also has a wharf there as well. So that is 35% straight away with little work from you yourself. And then how does that affect things? So the distant cost of capital through port is lowered by 7%. Hostile disembark time is plus 7% for them. Friendly disembark is improved by 7%. And trade embark disembark cost is minus 17.5%. So again, you can see what Johan was saying here. Having these natural harbors to begin with is really going to help you, especially with trade, moving your armies around, and even control, as the distance cost is that proximity cost we were talking about earlier. And then the natural harbor suitability of 25% has the following impacts. And you can see the cost basically of building additional docking area is lowered by 7.5% with a 25% start base. And then the actual suitability is obviously the amount that it is. So yeah, that is plus 25%. But you can see even having a 25% natural harbor suitability is giving you significant bonuses for additional cost to build it up later on. If you had it at 0, if it wasn't suitable for a harbor at all, and you just kind of forced one on there, it is going to cost you the base amount, which is obviously going to be more expensive than if you do start with one of these natural harbors. And then to make use of all of this, what do you need? Well, you need ships, don't you? So shipbuilding, one of the disadvantages of playing a naval nation in other games they've made was the simple fact that unless you had a large coastline, you could not compete, no matter how good your coastline was. One of the reasons was the simple fact that one location could make one ship at a time, and if you wanted to recruit a regiment, you couldn't. So that is true. In EU4, you could only build a regiment or a ship in one location until that was finished, and then you could build another, and they would just build one at a time in a single location. So if you did have a very short shoreline, it would take you a long time to build up a fleet. I think it kind of made sense in a way, but it isn't a very good mechanic and it isn't very fun to actually play. In Project Caesar, though, this has all changed. Firstly, there are 3 construction queues in a location. There is a civil one for buildings, RGOs, and all other non-military oriented things you could do in a location. Secondly, they have one for the army base queue. And finally, there is a naval base queue. So you have the civil queue, that is doing whatever it wants. You also have the army base queue, so that is where you're making your regiments. And then you also have the naval queue. So you have those 3 ways. So you can recruit a regiment and a ship at the same time. They've also added the concept of parallel shipbuilding in a location, where buildings can construct additional shipbuilding slots in a location, where at the end of the game you can build up to 20 ships at the same time in the same shipyard. This is with all related advances, and one of the things you can unlock, and this is obviously special to Venice, is the Venetian Arsenal. This is a very famous shipbuilding area of Venice. Do read up about it if you are interested. It's amazing the stuff that they got up to there. And you can see here, this is special just to Venice, as I was saying. And this increases your shipbuilding capacity by 4. So you can build, I guess, 5 ships at a time at least, because you can generally build 1 plus 4, so that makes 5. It obviously unlocks building ships there, and then the required production method has the 4 things you need there to actually get the most out of this building once it's built. And then the requirements for construction are actually weirdly exactly the same. I wonder if this just hasn't been balanced out yet, because it's weird that the construction cost and the production method are exactly the same costs. I think that must be a mistake, or maybe just hasn't gone through balancing. I guess it could be exactly the same all the time, but it would be weird it costs the same to build it as it is to upkeep it constantly. Although, I guess if you're building ships, it would probably, I guess, maybe equal out to roughly the same anyway, but it doesn't really matter. We're a long way till launch, so if it is going to change, it will do by then. The most important bit was having these buildings that allow you to build more ships in the same location. Next is going to get on to what you can actually use your ships for. So the first thing is going to be blockades. This came up in one of the dev diaries recently about how you do sieges. It actually helps you by blocking off food supply to the defenders and things like that. One of the most powerful abilities that you could do during a war is blockading another nation's coast, as we were just saying. The immediate impact is a reduction of food production, maximum control, and making trades much more costly and likely to reroute somewhere else. There's also the fact that development growth is severely slowed and the decline of prosperity and a dramatic reduction in their maritime presence. So it has a lot of effects here. It's going to obviously immediately, as we were just saying, help you in any wars. It's going to stop trading. It's going to lower control. It's going to lower food production. It's going to block actually feeding the armies that are stuck in a fort maybe that only has contact from the sea. Then, of course, it is going to have long-term effects. It is going to affect that development growth, the prosperity of it, and also the maritime presence. So again, they're going to feel the control effect really shrinking. If they're one of these nations that controls their lands mainly through their ships, it is going to really affect how much control they have. That's going to have massive effects on their realm. As some might say, an image tells 1,000 words. I think that is true, especially in these dev diaries. So they're going to show us a few screenshots here related to blockades to make it a bit easier to understand, which is great. The first one here is blockaded by enemies. You can see the modifiers. This is taking effect in this example. So monthly prosperity -2%, max control reduction, maritime presence, food multiplier, monthly development, and the trade embark, disembark cost. You can see pretty much matching what he was saying above. And to do all this, you might think you need to blockade a whole bunch of areas, but you don't actually need to do that. Even with a single place blockaded, the maritime presence in a sea zone is severely impacted, and it will take many, many months to recover unless you have coastal forts or navies patrolling it for a long time after the war. So as soon as the war ends, it isn't like this just immediately recovers. It does take time to build this back up. Again, building into these things has been talking about in all these dev diaries, that war is going to have a lot more of an effect on your realm in this game versus EU4. You're going to feel long-term effects, so you're really going to have to think about if a war is useful or not, especially in the short to medium term. So in this one, as you can see, this is a monthly change for the County of Holland. And you can see here, I'll let you all guess which one has a blockade at the moment. Yes, it is the long name I'm not going to try pronounce, so you can see how badly this is affecting it. In the next one, this is going to show the blockade capacity of a specific fleet. And not all ships are great at blockading, although I think every ship can blockade, he says. But for the most part, you are going to want to have a mix of heavy and light ships to do the blockading to get the most out of it. So you can see here, as I was saying, this second navy here has a blockade capacity of 1.71 due to the galley. As you can see here, the Hulk is not as good as the traditional galleys. I guess it's more useful for something else. And then currently blockading and following locations at the following efficiency. And you can see this matches the previous one where it is really affecting that longer name one. And then the other one's not so much at all. And then Middelburg, it is affecting half as much as that one. I guess it's next to each other. I don't know the layout of this area of the map, if I'm being honest. Somebody will probably correct me in the comments and say it's not. But anyway, this is where it is at the moment. And with all that being said, well, how much of a fleet do you actually need to make an efficient blockade? There are different things that affect it. Populations, infrastructure, and development increases the amount of ships that you need to blockade a certain location. And as you can see again on the screen, this is the coastal location they were blockading earlier. You can see the population capacity, the food production, the supply limit, and the monthly development growth. And then also on this screenshot, it shows the blockade capacity we were just talking about. And that requires 1.02 due to the following reasons: population, port and the development of the location. So if you can increase those, that is going to make it harder for other people to blockade your areas. I'm not sure if any of those are directly affected by the top half of that tooltip. I think it's just showing the whole thing in one screen there. But the 3 numbers at the bottom there are what are important for blockading, making sure you can combat those with your fleets or build it up so you can't be blockaded easily. In the next section, he's going to talk about ship repairing, again, something that is changing quite a bit from EU4. So every month that a fleet is in a sea zone that is not adjacent to a friendly port, they will start taking attrition. This attrition increases dramatically if the fleet is outside of naval range. This attrition creates a chance for ships to be damaged. I think that does make sense. While usually you can only repair a ship in a port, there are advances in some ages that allow you to repair your ships in coastal sea zones. While in the Age of Revolutions, you can repair a ship up to 50% efficiency without going back to a port at all. So that's pretty cool. Again, showing the progress of technology in this era and how it helped you kind of keep your fleet active without having to bring it home all the time to repair it. Your naval range is calculated from every core port that you own, or is owned by one of your subjects, or is owned by somebody you have negotiated fleet basing rights with. I don't think this is a massive change from EU4, to be honest. Again, somebody could correct me if I'm wrong with that. And then in the screenshot showing this off, this is Venice. You can see it has a lot of control over central and eastern Mediterranean, and then a little bit going into the western side of the Mediterranean. And as they get more technology, improve their ships, things like that, that is going to push out and allow them to really escape the Mediterranean and go potentially explore elsewhere. Next, we're going to be talking about transporting troops. So all ships in Project Caesar will have the ability to transport regiments. It isn't just going to be transport ships, although obviously they are much better at it than normal ships. Each ship has a capacity that it can carry, and this is measured not in regiments, but the amount of men it can carry. So it isn't just they can carry 2 regiments, then 3, then 4. It is actually how many men they can move. So I wonder if using this, you can split regiments between ships and transport them over without actually splitting the regiment up. I guess it does like automatically split them if it works out in that kind of way mathematically. They have also added automated transportation similar to EU4 to make moving armies around the world that little bit less painful. That is cool. We've seen all the way through these dev diaries, they have this automation wherever it makes sense to make the game easier to play. The next thing they're going to talk about is actual naval combat. A naval battle has a change that it has no separate bombardment phase, unlike landed armies, as most ships have guns, and it wouldn't really make sense to have this section separate, and they tend to want to use them as often as they can. Otherwise, it will work similar to land combat in that you have different sections, but the individual ships you have will fire upon each other. So it will still have those 3 lanes of combat, as it were, the center, the left flank, and the right flank. But it just works out how the battle is going to progress, slightly different to land combat, but not majorly, I don't think, by the sounds of it. But when it comes to the actual combat algorithm, ships do work a little bit differently, and that is that there is no combat power or the amount of soldiers fighting to consider. Instead, it is just the ships, the amount of cannons they have, and the hull size. Cannons are the offensive value, and hull size is the defensive value, and I imagine there's going to be a bunch of modifiers around that as well. And as is already discussed, there are a bunch of different ships in the game. There are 4 main categories though: heavy ships, light ships, galleys, and transports. In each category, there are at least 1 ship of each age that can be researched, and there are also some unique ships that can be built. We're going to talk about one of those in a second. There is also no real restriction on the roles different ships can perform, but a transport is not the best at blockading, and a light ship may not be ideal for transporting soldiers. So each ship, as he mentioned earlier, can do everything. It's just better at doing certain things. But if you're caught in a pinch, you can use them to do something they're not really there for. Each type of ship also differs on how many trained soldiers it needs for its crew, how many cannons they can have, and other changes as well. You can also raise ships as levies from your population, but they are generally suited for transport armies rather than actually fighting in a proper war. So they're just like emergency ships that you need if you desperately need to transport an army around. Think of something like Dunkirk in the Second World War. Really just any ship England could spare went over the coast, grabbed men, and brought them back to England. They weren't specific transport. They were just little tugboats, anything that would work. And that is how that worked. And it sounds like we're going to get the ability to kind of do something like that in this as well. Not obviously the same as that, but you can emergency call up some galleys or whatever. And that is going to help you if you do really need to. In the next screenshot, this is going to show off Aragon, and you can see here, it actually has a region-specific unit. This is an Iberian caravel, and that is obviously only for Iberian countries to build, and that is going to have more guns, more hull capability, but also needs more sailors to operate as well. So if you are playing in Iberia, you do have this special ship, especially early on. And with that, that is the end of the dev diary for this week. Let me know what you think about it. I think these are all fantastic changes from EU4. I don't think it's anything like majorly groundbreaking, but I do think it does make the game play out a lot better for naval. I think a lot of you will agree the naval side of EU4 is kind of bad, and I think this is at least a good step towards making it a little bit more interesting, making it more impactful, and actually getting some use out of it a little bit more, especially with how control works, how that proximity effect works, and things like that. And also, from what we've seen from the ports in this, that is going to affect trade a lot more, I think, than in EU4. I think it does affect it quite a bit, but this really makes it sound like it's going to have a lot more of an effect on your trade. But with all that being said, finally, guys, next week we're going to find out how colonization works. I've been waiting for this since the first dev diary. It is the part I'm most interested in, so I can't wait for next week. And if you can't wait for next week, this is the segue. Do make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm covering EU5, Project Caesar, whatever you want to call it, until official announcement, launch, and beyond. This game, of course, isn't even officially announced yet, but we will get that, I think, before the end of the year. I'd be very surprised if we get to next year without a proper announcement of this game. We could be wrong with that, but I do think maybe we will get one. We'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.